We're taking a look at a disturbing case out of Wisconsin where a 25-year-old woman is accused of murdering her lover, dismembering his body, and sexually assaulting him after he was killed. But it's that final charge that her defense attorneys are now challenging. Thanks for joining us today on Law&Crime Network. I'm Gillespie. So the defendant in this case is Taylor Schabusiness, who investigators say murdered 24-year-old Shad Tyrion in Green Bay, Wisconsin, back in February of 2022. At the time, Tyrion's mother found his decapitated head at the bottom of her stairway. Investigators say Schabusiness murdered Tyrion after she began choking him during sex. She later told investigators she had been smoking meth and shooting up trazodone. She allegedly put a leg and a foot in her vehicle and even left Tyrion's head in a bucket. New court documents state other body parts were found in a Jimmy Choo bag and even more in a crock pot box. She later told investigators, quote, "I can't believe I left the head, though." Schabusiness's case has faced many delays since her arrest, though, after questions of her competency and a change of defense attorneys. Most recently, Schabusiness was caught on camera violently attacking her public defender, Quinn Jolly, before she was restrained by Brown County Sheriff's deputies. Jolly was later removed from the case and a new attorney was appointed. But just this week, a Brown County judge ruled court documents could be unsealed, giving us even more gruesome details. The judge, however, kept some evidence under seal, saying it was too graphic to even be shown publicly. So to take a deep dive into this disturbing case, we're joined now by forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. As always, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Joseph Scott Morgan.
Hey, how are you this morning? Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always great to talk to you. So let's start. This is a very unusual case. Not only that the defendant is a female, but even more that she's accused of murdering a man, dismembering his body. Have you seen a case like this before?
Yeah, not to this degree. We were talking off camera just a moment ago, and I have to admit, there has been an uptick, at least, and it might just be my perception because I cover so many cases of dismemberments. It seems like we've just been awash in them. This case in particular is very troubling, but um, it's rooted in substances. You know, when you begin to think about, as you mentioned just a moment ago, there's meth involved and trazodone, and admittedly, they've been ingested, and so that gives you an idea of the world in which the accused, at least, existed in, which is certainly, I think, to say the least, is living on the edge.
So this story has so many grisly details. We've actually been following it since way back in 2022, so we knew a lot of them, but these recently unsealed court documents are giving us even more disturbing details. One of them really disturbing. It includes that the victim's penis was removed from his body. Is that something you see often?
Not something that you see often. However, this goes to a level of when you talk about this postmortem mutilation that goes on. There's a lot of psychopathy in that particular from that particular perspective, where you're attempting not just to, I think, destroy the individual, simply through this idea of dismemberment, but you're trying to depersonalize them to a great degree. Um, and there's any number of cases over history, throughout history, where you've had this kind of mutilation that goes on post mortem. I know, to the best of my recollection, I've handled cases where people have abused corpses in a highly sexualized way, whether it be from using sharp force instruments or insertions many times, and of course this happens in a postmortem state, and they're living out this kind of fantastical scenario in their mind. You just don't know what the motivation is, and one of the big questions here, I think, because this idea of kind of indwelling psychopathy, where they're talking, I think that one of the things that has come up in this case is the idea that she's suffering from some type of mental illness. Well, is it actually a mental illness that would compromise her ability to stand trial and understand what's happening? Or are you just talking about somebody that has a depraved mind?
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people who are following the case are asking about. I mean, her competency has been up for question multiple times. The trial even been delayed, but most recently she was found competent to stand trial. So that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But kind of back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. So her defense attorneys are saying that because the victim's penis was removed from his body, there's no way he could have been sexually assaulted. Do you think that claim holds any water?
No, no, not necessarily. I think that now the supposition is that this sexual assault apparently took place in a postmortem state. I think it all centers around the severing of the penis because that in and of itself is a sexualized event. Again, this goes to a special level of depravity at this point in time. Uh, The penis being removed and placed into the bucket with the head. One would ask, well, what was done with the penis after it had been removed? I think, and again, the judge has sealed, and rightly so at this point in time, because oh my gosh, you talk about prejudicing the jury pool. If certain of these details leaked out, I think that it's going to be one of those events that so shocks the conscience of the public at large. That's why this coming to trial, it might be one of the blockbuster cases that we have heard, particularly from a forensic standpoint, that we've covered in some time. There's going to be a lot here to kind of explore and try to understand what exactly went on, how much of this trauma was inflicted on him is going to be important to understand either in the antemortem state or the postmortem state, because obviously things happened in the antemortem state to bring him to death. It's kind of this path that's traveled relative to him, and then what happens in the postmortem state. So, in this case, the testimony of not just the crime scene investigators, but the forensic pathologist, the medical examiner in this case is going to be incredible. It'll be incredible to see and kind of hear what they have to say about it.
I think some of the things you touched on just there are really important. I mean, even hearing about the case, it's difficult just to hear about, but then we talk about these really graphic images. And Green Bay is just this relatively small city in Northeast Wisconsin, pretty modest people. So, is it possible that the jurors are going to be exposed to some of these really grisly, gruesome images during trial?
You can't escape it. Yes, they are, and it's the hard, cold reality. Um, and it's a double edged sword for the defense, right? Because if you're trying to say that there is psychopathology that's going on that inhibited her ability to make correct judgments and all of these sorts of things, um, if that's what you're putting forth as a defense team, then you have to explore these graphic things, because you would say, who else in their right mind would do this sort of thing? They have to be in the state of mind where they didn't have their faculties about them. But then again, the defense will probably say, we see a lot of these cases where they'll say, I mean, how many of these have we covered on Law and Crime, where they say, well, these images are just too prejudicial. You know, can you imagine just for a moment seeing a bucket containing a human head and a penis? And it's there in the bucket, and it's going to be part and parcel of all the evidence that is collected, because it shows what actually happened at that scene. There'll be it'll just be over the top relative to blood evidence that's there, and we're forgetting about the rest of the body. We're kind of focusing on what's contained in that bucket, but she's talking about taking apart limbs and all these sorts of things and the deposition of those. And one interesting statement that has been reported in the media that I really found fascinating. She allegedly said to the police, "Good luck finding all of his organs." Holy smokes, who says that? If we are to believe that that's the statement that she made, why how do you take the measure of that? So that again could be something that comes up in court, and again it goes to her state of mind.
This one's going to be really interesting to follow as it goes to court and more details come out. But ahead of that, still the defense is saying, okay, we've got to get this sexual assault charge kind of thrown out. And they're arguing something interesting here. They're saying that because the victim was, quote, not a person at the alleged time of the incident, that it doesn't count as sexual assault. They're citing Wisconsin state statutes saying that after somebody has died, they're no longer a person. Does that make any sense?
Well, I guess you'd have to take the measure of that relative to what the statutory obligation is in the state of Wisconsin. How has that law been structured by the legislature? And here's the really interesting thing in 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 the history of Wisconsin law. Has this ever been put to the test before? This could be a benchmark moment. In that one little slice of pie there, when you think about it, is this something that has been tested before? Because this goes to again, it's one of the underlying aggravating factors. Now, obviously, Wisconsin doesn't have the death penalty. All we have to do is reflect back to Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Jeffrey Dahmer did a lot of things that were really over the top. That is a gross understatement on my part. So it's not like that hasn't been visited before, and he had sexualized the dead in that particular case. I wonder if in his particular case this had been addressed. I don't have the recall to be able to kind of understand that or put that to the test here. But in any other circumstances, has there ever been a case where this particular statute, part of the criminal code, has it been put to the test before the bench? Going to be interesting to see.
And those comparisons between Jeffrey Dahmer and Taylor Schabusiness are kind of interesting in that they have similarities, both happening in Wisconsin. And this could be a groundbreaking case for the state of Wisconsin, too. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. But as far as Schabusiness's team, they're arguing that the state testing of Thyrion's body for that sexual assault evidence, they say that it's inconclusive. And I wanted to ask you specifically about this because you're the expert here. So, what could that mean that they're saying it's inconclusive?
Well, if yeah, and it would be because look, when you begin to think about sexual assault from the perspective of where we have an event that occurs that an individual has been charged with sexual assault, what kind of physical evidence do you have to demonstrate that? Well, if you have a male involved who is the aggressor, one of the things obviously that you're going to look for is going to be, say, for instance, seminal deposition on the body, either externally or internally. That's one of the reasons we do rape kits, and we test. We test for this, and so it this again is unique because you have a female on male event that is occurring. How do you frame sexual assault when it comes to female on male at this particular time? This goes back also to, there's been a lot of talk of bondage, these sorts of things. The word chain keeps coming up in media reports all over the place. Kind of a sadomasochistic, kind of event that is occurring between the two. And one other interesting point in this case is that there's kind of a little known uh, cause of death that came up that I kind of caught hold of when I was reading one of the reports. She allegedly admitted to sitting on the victim as he was coughing up blood. Okay, just envision that for a second. Well, that act is actually something that's referred to as burking. Burking is what it's referred to, and it's kind of a restraining kind of event. You see it in the context of police officers trying to take people into custody, and what you're doing is you're inhibiting the body's ability to uptake oxygen from a literal physical sense where their chest cannot expand, and so you're sitting on this individual. It's compromising the airway. It's almost like a compression asphyxia is what we refer to it as. The chest can't expand, and all we have to do is just think about when you when you take in oxygen and you exhale, uh, his ability, if you are to believe the statement that she allegedly made, was compromised in that sense. Sometimes burking can be sexualized. That again, are you going to make that intellectual leap to say that the burking is part of a sexual event? There's so many little nuances to this whole story. It's just super bizarre.
So today, the first time talking to you about this burking, that's really the first time I've heard of it. And as this case comes to trial, we're going to hear more details. Do you expect more things that we've never heard before are going to be revealed when it does go to trial?
Yeah, I think so. I think what would be really fascinating in this case, and of course, there's no guarantee that this would happen, is that if they had a sexual behaviorist give testimony in this case that kind of explores these various spectrums that they're talking about here. This is, and again, I think from um, this the victim and the alleged perpetrator, what kind of histrionics do they have? Has there been evidence that they've engaged in this behavior before, that this is something that was a regular event? I think that's going to come up. Well, we've done this before and nothing happened like this until we introduced methamphetamine into it. And again, that's another little hook, that the attorneys are going to kind of dance around, I think. And it's multi-layered, and there are going to be a lot of traps, I think, for both the prosecution and the defense, that they have to be very much aware of as they kind of move, because it's so highly complex.
Yeah, this is going to be a very intense case with a lot of layers that we're going to make sure to follow and bring you the latest. As always, thank you, Joseph Scott Morgan, for all of your insight in this case.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So far, the judge in Taylor Schabusiness' case has not made any rulings on the defense's motion, but will likely do so at a June 13th hearing. That's when Schabusiness is due back in court. Jury selection in her case is expected to begin on July 21st. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.